All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating chapter from an ancient legal text, Deuteronomy 25. Now, when you first read it, it can seem like a totally random collection of strange, disconnected rules. But if you look closer, you'll find something pretty incredible. A detailed blueprint for how to build a society from the ground up.
So what does connect all these things? I mean, on the surface, a courtroom flogging, a public shaming with a sandal, and a command to hate an ancient enemy, they seem to have absolutely nothing in common. But they're all here in this one chapter. And when you put them all together, they actually paint a really clear picture of how this community was meant to work.
And that's really the key takeaway. These aren't just a random list of do's and don'ts. It's a blueprint, a master plan for building a society. It lays out very specific ideas about justice, about family, about integrity in business, and even about how you forge a national identity.
Okay, so first up, justice and its limits. We're talking about how a society balances punishment and dignity. You know, every society has to figure out how to handle crime. But what's so fascinating here isn't just the punishment, it's the focus on the limits of that punishment. So, what's the magic number? 40. The law says if someone is found guilty and they're sentenced to a flogging, the judge can't order more than 40 lashes. And the text is super clear about why. To go beyond that would be to publicly degrade a fellow Israelite in your eyes. So you see, there's a hard line drawn in the sand. Punishment, yes, but it can't be allowed to completely strip away someone's humanity. Okay, now the next law gets a lot more specific, and frankly, it's pretty jarring. The text lays out this very particular scenario. It involves a fight between two men, and one of their wives gets involved.
So let's just walk through the anatomy of this conflict. You have two men fighting, okay? Then, one man's wife jumps in to try and rescue her husband. But, and this is the critical part, she does it by seizing his attacker by his private parts. Now, in this cultural context, that was seen as a huge violation, like a direct attack on a man's ability to have children, his whole family line. So the penalty it's absolute. Her hand is to be cut off, and the text adds, with no pity shown. This sets an incredibly severe boundary in a physical fight, with obviously life-altering consequences.
All right, now the blueprint shifts from the courtroom to the home, from public justice to the private, but equally critical worlds of the family. And the big theme here is duty, and a sandal, and how you secure a legacy in ancient Israel. It's all about the sacred obligation to make sure your family's name continues.
And the core concept here is something called levirate marriage. It's basically the duty of a man to marry his deceased brother's childless widow to produce an heir for the dead brother. Now, this was a powerful social tool. On one hand, it provided a safety net for the widow, who would otherwise be left with nothing. But its main purpose was actually something else entirely. And here's how that duty was supposed to be fulfilled. A brother dies without a son, his living brother must marry the widow, and then the first son born from that marriage actually carries the name of the deceased brother. The whole point was to make sure that the dead brother's name is not blotted out from Israel. I mean, you have to understand, in this society, to die without an heir wasn't just sad, it was like being completely erased from history. But of course, what happens if the brother refuses this duty? You know, the law anticipates this. Not everyone is going to want to take on this big obligation. The community doesn't actually force him to do it, but there is a very public and very symbolic consequence.
So this is what happens. It's called the ceremony of the unsandaled. The widow goes to the town elders, right there at the city gate where all business is done. The brother is called, and he has to publicly confirm that he's refusing. Then, right there in front of the elders, she walks up to him, removes one of his sandals, spits in his face, and then she declares his new, shameful status. This isn't a court case. It's a carefully designed ritual of public humiliation.
And she says, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. And with that, his fate is sealed. From that day forward, his whole household is known by a new name, the family of the unsandaled. It's a permanent stain on their reputation, a really powerful social pressure to make sure people fulfilled what was seen as a sacred duty. All right, so from family duty, the blueprint pivots again, this time to the honest scale, integrity in the marketplace and the field. The rules for society extend right into everyday business, demanding absolute fairness and integrity. The rules are pretty straightforward. The dishonest way is to have two different sets of weights and measures, a heavy one for buying and a light one for selling. You know, the old trick. The honest way is just having accurate weights and measures. But the logic here is what's really cool. The text directly connects economic integrity to a long and prosperous life in the land. So being honest in business wasn't just, a nice ethical idea. It was seen as absolutely foundational to the entire nation's survival and success.
And this principle of fairness, it even extends to the animals. There's a simple, really memorable law. Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. It's a small rule, but it's got a huge idea behind it. Anyone who labors deserves to enjoy the fruits of that labor. It's just a principle of fundamental decency. Okay, and the chapter ends on a much darker, much more sobering note. We move from personal and commercial ethics to something else entirely, an unforgettable enemy and the role that collective memory and identity play in a nation.
It starts with this very heavy command. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt. This isn't just a suggestion, it's an instruction to the entire nation to hold on tight to a specific, painful memory. This isn't about a personal grudge, it's about a collective, historical trauma that is being deliberately kept alive for a very specific reason. And the text lays out the case against Amalek very clearly. They attacked the Israelites on their journey from Egypt. But it wasn't a fair fight. They struck when the people were already weary and worn out. And worst of all, they specifically targeted the weakest people who were lagging behind. In the eyes of the text, this was the ultimate act of cowardice, an attack that showed they had no fear of God.
And so the final command that's given is it's chillingly absolute. Once the Israelites are settled and secure in their land, they are commanded to blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. And then it ends with that incredible paradox. Do not forget. You must remember this. You must hold on to this memory for the sole purpose of one day completely erasing your enemy from history.
So when you step back and look at the whole chapter, what do you have? It's a society's blueprint. That courtroom flogging, the sandal ceremony, the honest weights, that unforgettable enemy, they aren't random at all. They are 4 pillars. For justice, punishment has to have limits to preserve dignity. For family, communal duty is essential to protect a legacy. For integrity, fairness is required in every single transaction. And for identity, a nation is bound together by a shared and sometimes a really brutal memory.
And that really leaves us with a final question to think about, right? This ancient text used public rituals of shame and powerful commands to remember, all to enforce its core values. It really makes you wonder. Every society has its own unwritten rules about duty and shame. What are ours today? What are the things our culture demands we never, ever forget? And what are our modern versions of that unsandaled ceremony? The subtle or not so subtle ways we enforce our own ideas of duty and honor.